Hmm.
Hello, everyone. We have about, I think, three or so more people that may join, but I don't know if they are joining. So perhaps we'll get started. Um, it's good to see Alan. I haven't seen you in a while. I'm glad you're joining us. Alan, you weren't at the last meeting, is that right?
I was at the last meeting. Yep.
Okay. I
As
did not
as
say
a
hello last
primary
time.
observer.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Great. Well, we are going to go around and do just a quick round of introductions again, but I wanted to put the link to the working notes in the chat. If you wanna link into that document, our agenda for today is at the end of that document. Hold on just a moment. I've got some background noise. Sorry, my mom decided to start blowing leaves as I get on the phone. Um, so, uh, so welcome, and it's good to see everyone. We're going to start off with a round of introductions again. This is just to remind everyone who is who, and then we'll dive into talking about some of the topics to start fleshing out these recommendations. So I'll start. Jamie Vaudry from the Connecticut National Estuarine Research Reserve, and I've been at UConn for a number of years, interested in seagrass, and have done a little bit of work on the interactions between seagrass, and aquaculture, just a little bit. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Larry.
Hi, Hi, Larry Dunn, Chair of the Town of Groton Conservation Commission. And pass it off to Tessa.
Thanks, Larry. My name is Tessa Getchis. I'm with UConn Extension and Connecticut Sea Grant. My area of focus is aquaculture. Know a little bit about eelgrass. Thank you. And I'll turn it over to Lucas.
Thank you, Tessa. I am Lucas. For those of you that don't know me, I am the administrator of the working group. I'm the interim clerk of the Environment Committee, and I do some outreach and press things in addition to that here at Senate Dems. So very happy to be here and very happy to learn about eelgrass. Honestly, it's very interesting to me. So thank you all. I'll pass it off to Bill.
Yeah, hi, Bill Lucy. I'm the Long Island Sound Keeper. I work with Save the Sound, and we've got a noisy group of eelgrass volunteers next door. That's why I'm hiding in the broom closet here, gluing seeds to clams. I will pass it off to David.
Good afternoon, David Carey with the Department of Ag's Bureau of Aquaculture. I just jumped on, so I'm not sure. I missed who to pass it to. So, Craig?
Sure, thanks, David. Craig Tobias, UConn, Department of Marine Sciences, also Groton Shellfish Commission. I've gotten into some restoration efforts with Jamie, and then on the commission, we also run up against, potential future use conflicts between shellfish aquaculture and eelgrass. Thanks.
Why don't we go to Kelly next?
Hi, everyone. Kelly Strike. I'm with the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. I work primarily in water quality relative to Long Island Sound and the embayments, and more recently involved in a few of the Long Island Sound eelgrass initiatives.
And Alan?
Let's see. Do I have, am I muted? Yeah,
Nope, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, good. I'm Alan Bannister, representing the Stonington Shellfish Commission. I've taught oceanology at Pine Point for 30 years and have had a good deal of contact in those early years with Dr. Fred Short out of University of New Hampshire, and his efforts to restore eelgrass. And I continue to be interested in eelgrass and restoration and all of that goes with that. That's why I'm here.
Very good. And Griffin.
Hello, I'm Griffin. I'm a student at Marine Science Magnet High School, and yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Right, thank you. I think that covered everyone. So I pasted the link to the Google Doc again in the chat, just to make sure everyone had it. And again, if you scroll to the end of that document, it's our agenda and a place for us to take notes for today. There is a poll that Lucas sent out, and I'd say we got fairly decent return on it. I think 5 or 6 people responded, which in this group is pretty good because I think we have maybe 10, 12 people total. If you haven't responded and you want to weigh in on any of these future meeting dates, that's what that poll is. It also asks, what sections you're interested in terms of what we're talking about. But it does bring up the issue of our future dates. I am going to share my screen for a moment so that you all can see what I'm looking at. Let's see, share screen. So based on the responses to that poll, it looked like November 22nd and December 7th were generally good. December 18th and 19th were good for half of us, maybe. And so I wanted to see if maybe a little less than half of us actually. So I wanted to see if December 21st might be an option. I think what we'll do is I'm going to ask Lucas to send out an email and just say, these are the dates, and we'll probably put in the conversations that we're expecting to have during those, and just poll people as to whether December 21st is a good option. I realize that's a hard time to meet, and so I'm not sure that we'll find an ideal date at that for that last December meeting there. In terms of January, all of those dates looked equally good thus far. So if you have not done the poll, but you have some limitations in January, please do submit your responses so we might settle on January 10th or 11th and January 24th or 26th. Okay, so today I really wanted to spend most of the day in conversation. So less talking from me, less talking from, just a few of us, but talk more about the barriers to restoration, what we consider as a group are the barriers to restoration. And so that can inform the work that we do over the coming weeks to kind of get some information about those barriers and bring them back each meeting to talk about where we think those challenges are and what those pathways around those barriers or over those barriers are likely to be. Before we get to that, though, I did want to take a look at this outline of the document, and I'm going to post this into the chat, if I can find the chat on here. I'm not so familiar with Zoom. Oh, wait, it's over here. Okay, there we go. Got it. All right. So what I did was based on our conversation from our last call, I put together an outline of the topics that we said we wanted to cover, moved them around a little bit in order. So all of the order is still, we can still massage this and get it into an order that makes sense to everyone. But in the document, I just put the big topics, And then over in the comments, I added, I don't have a good location here. So here's an example. So I added things that we had discussed or that were highlighted. You know, if we're talking about siting and permitting of planting, these are the topics that had come up as being important. So I'm not going to go through this right now in detail, and you'll see why in a moment. But my thought was that as we progress through through our remaining meetings, we'll spend a little bit of time each meeting talking about our recommendations and kind of where we see the challenges are and how to approach those challenges. That's really the meat, or what I view as the meat of this recommendations. You know, we want to summarize our understanding of eelgrass and aquaculture in Long Island Sound and how we can promote eelgrass habitat restoration. But some of that is a little bit of gathering the background data. So we'll touch on that each week, but we will also spend the majority of our time discussing what those recommendations look like as we move forward. So I'm going to go through this very quickly. I am actually just going to use I like to look at this summary over here on the left, or the outline. So there's a bit of background, which is really just about this working group and why it was created, and how it might coincide with the Eelgrass Collaborative. The Eelgrass Collaborative is a longer term effort. So how do these two groups interact or inform each other is what I was envisioning for this section. Then get into current knowledge and existing efforts. We had talked about the benefits of eelgrass as a habitat. And I forgot that we talked about benefits to humans. And I realized that did not get in here. Then a review of monitoring and change analysis of eelgrass I wrote down Southern New England, Long Island Sound, and Long Island, which is our area and our neighbors. This was one of the charges in the establishment of the work group, was to look at the monitoring that's been done in Long Island Sound and neighboring states and how that informs the change analysis and our understanding of eelgrass distribution. So there are references, you know, if we look at this that says review the efforts of Mike Bradley and URI, Jill Carr up in Massachusetts have done a lot of this work in addition to the current mapping efforts and the past mapping efforts that have occurred in Long Island Sound.
Jamie, just a quick question. Have you given everyone access to this? I can see it on your screen, but it's saying I don't have permission.
You don't have permission.
No,
Okay.
I have permission for your other long-running document.
Yeah, I did give access to everyone. That's what's here. Let me just try opening, maybe if I go anyone with the link.
Okay.
I was trying to avoid making it open to the world, just so that we didn't get editing happening in it. Let me just make sure. But go ahead and try it now and see if you can get in.
I'm in.
Okay.
Yes, that works. Thanks.
Very good. So, so that's the really, you know, we're in this current knowledge and existing effort section. We'll also review eelgrass habitat restoration, such as current efforts to support eelgrass restoration, the historical distribution, what we know about it, understanding the habitat requirements of eelgrass, local stressors, genetic diversity and resilience, habitat suitability for restoration. And all of these, again, in the comments, there's some guidance on where to get started with each of these in terms of reference material. Also in that section, there's preservation and expansion of eelgrass. You know, we phrased it in our last meeting about preserving and expanding eelgrass as a habitat, that preservation being key. It's not just that we want to restore eelgrass, but we want to preserve what we have. This is a section on reviewing the policy, legislation, and recommendations in our neighboring regions. At our last meeting, I mentioned that Emily Watling is working for the Eelgrass Collaborative this semester. She's doing a lot of this, not consolidation, summary of the policies and rules in other states and in New York and Connecticut as well for the Eelgrass Collaborative. So I asked that she step that up in terms of what she's working on first. And that way we're hopefully able to use some of her summary information and discuss that here as a group, rather than one of us putting in a lot of effort to look through these policies and regs, kind of taking advantage of that work which Emily was already planning on doing. So that's just laid out here. We had mentioned that we wanted to talk about stressors to eelgrass, and I put to Connecticut eelgrass because if you're talking about stressors to eelgrass, it can get really broad if you're talking about its full distribution. So what are the challenges for our local eelgrass? And these were the 4 things that we had identified as stressors at our last meeting, that being nutrients, temperature, physical damage, and then water clarity.
Hey, Jamie, just a quick point
Yep.
clarification. In section 2.4, preservation and expansion. So expansion, you mean just sort of natural expansion of beds, not
no,
purposeful restorations? Because
I
that's the
think it's
previous section.
restoration too. So maybe let's change that to restoration.
Okay, because
Preservation and
that's
restoration. Yes.
okay. Yeah, because
Yeah.
the previous section was restoration, so I wasn't entirely sure what you meant by that.
Yeah, I think this is more on, what's been done in Connecticut and Long Island Sound and probably Rhode Island, since we touched Rhode Island.
Okay.
What influences, and these need some refining. Let's put it that way. Those sections will change. Whereas this gets more at the policy, legislation, and recommendations that we see from other states around us. Yeah. So it's really this part that's the important part. And
Jamie,
then,
could you
yep, go ahead.
just go back to stressors really quick too?
Yep.
So I would also add to that predation or invasive species impacts, the biological component, swans, resident geese, green crabs, all those type of stressors.
Okay.
Thanks. Sorry I missed the last meeting, and I did watch the recording. That was looked like a very productive meeting that generated this, so it's a good outline.
Yes. And then these are certainly less fleshed out. I think these are the areas that we need to spend the most time talking about. And those are those potential barriers to restoration, which we will dive into today. Engaging the community. So we had talked about that community engagement piece being important to gain support for restoration efforts in the long term, and also to educate the public and get them involved in that restoration piece. And then finally, the working group recommendations. The funding needs, policy and legislative rulings, what we see as a need as we move forward. So a few more minutes here, just talking about the logistics of this. So today, in about 10 minutes here, we'll dive into this issue of starting to talk about those barriers to restoration. And then this is what I proposed for topics in the coming weeks. The idea being that, we won't be going through this outline each time as I'm doing now. Instead, I'm hoping that we get people who are willing to pick up sections in that report and share what they might know about that particular topic, or read through information and pull out information here. The expectation is not that everyone is going to step forward and lead something, but I would love it if everyone did that. But I recognize that many people are willing to contribute, but don't want to step up and lead. And that's based on just the polling responses. So I might tap people on the shoulder to do something. But the expectation is that we'll be working through this as a group, and and those people who are knowledgeable in certain areas might lead sections or the whole section. So that's why I have lead person / people here. So I think next meeting, I was hoping to do stressors to Connecticut eelgrass and then eelgrass habitat restoration. These are relatively short discussions. You know, when I say presentation, I'm thinking of like a 5-minute presentation followed by a 10 to 15-minute discussion. So more back and forth. So that when I say presentation, I'm thinking of a short overview of relevant information versus a long presentation. So 5 to 10-minute presentation followed by some discussion. Leaving the bulk of our meeting usually for this last item, which is to continue to discuss barriers and pathways to success. And you know, the specific topic for this will come out of our discussion today in terms of what we might need to discuss next time. December, we're moving into the policy, legislation, and recommendations in neighboring regions and programs. I mentioned that Emily Watling from the Eelgrass Collaborative was already working on summarizing those legislations. So what she's doing is she's pulling together the state policies and any regulations or rules that are on the books in our neighboring states. So we're going to take advantage of the work that she's putting in and finding those and pulling them together. But then we'll be distilling down that information in our own way for this report. So this putting her on December 6th, December 7th gives her a little time to pull that together. We will continue to discuss barriers and pathways to success. And really by December, we need to start developing our ideas, our recommendations for what we think should happen in terms of what is needed in Connecticut. December 18th, I put engaging the community on this date, and then also the review of the monitoring and change analysis of eelgrass in the region. And the reason I put this later, although I think it's an important topic to really inform some of what we're thinking, but the Eelgrass Collaborative is hosting a meeting on December 12th, and I know Bill will probably be there. I'd be surprised if he weren't. And I will certainly be there, and other of you might also be attending that. But the whole focus of those presentations is on monitoring and change analysis. So Mike Bradley, who does the eelgrass mapping in Long Island Sound and Rhode Island, will be presenting on some of the mapping and change analysis that he's done. And then Jill Carr, who is with Massachusetts, I want to say either the estuary program up there or the state agency. I can't quite recall which. But Jill has just wrapped up a project evaluating how we look at change in eelgrass systems throughout New England using different methods and assessing how we map and how we evaluate change. So my thinking was that Bill and I can listen in on that. We'll do a little prep work also to flesh out that section, I hope, but then summarize what we hear from Mike and Jill and how that might impact our thinking for recommendations. Again, big part will be discussing our working group recommendations. And then the last two meetings are really, no new topics in terms of looking at sections of our report, but really discussing our working group recommendations. What are we missing? What needs to be done, in our last few weeks? And then our last meeting will just be reviewing the final draft, making sure that everyone's happy with what we're looking at. So any thoughts on the timing here? Anything that doesn't make sense, or if you know you're going to be gone on a particular day and you really want to talk about that, you know, we can certainly move things around too. Not seeing any comments.
I think it looks pretty reasonable, Jamie.
Okay.
I do too, just, you know, I'm referring to the discussion from the last meeting. Just acknowledging, I think Brad brought up the option of extending this.
Yeah.
But you brought up the idea, Jamie, of being a short, concise report. So I think these are great headers. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of unknowns at the end of January when we have to submit this thing. So if that's still a possibility, I guess we can discuss that in January where we want to go. Maybe
I think yes, absolutely. And that's exactly what I was thinking about this discussion of final draft of recommendations. Our recommendations are probably, let's see what comes out of this new work that's going on and potentially reconvene. I also just realized that that what we might do in the report is in each of those sections, you know, include a very clear statement of, you know, this is the stuff that didn't get done that we think needs to be done. But for this initial report, these are the important things. So I think we want to hit the important things. We want to keep it concise, but informative and well-rounded. But then also, you know, note the things that we're like, oh, if we had another 6 months, we would probably do this or look at that. So that's something to add to that outline. All right, I am going to stop sharing because I can't really see you guys when you are all on there. And what I'm going to do is just post in the chat kind of sorry, I cannot type and talk at the same time. What I think we want to talk about over the next hour. And again, the idea here is I feel like our last meeting, we talked about everything else in terms of what we might want to include in the report and kind of touched on key things. So we have a good sense of where to go there in terms of things like the mapping and the change analysis, the history, the habitat benefits of eelgrass. But the part that I believe we really needed everyone here to contribute to is identifying the barriers to restoration as we see them. What are some potential pathways forward? Like what might we need to learn from our state agency, from our legislators? What might we need to learn in terms of new research? You know, what are those unanswered questions that are kind of holding us from moving forward with restoration in a big way? Some of the things that we had identified previously were permitting, siting of eelgrass restoration, and the conflicts that might arise with other uses of the environment, not just aquaculture, but things like marinas, boat traffic, other activities that occur in the coastal zone. Funding, and then of course, we haven't touched on this one, but the capacity of our infrastructure. Can we support a big eelgrass restoration effort? What do we need to do to support eelgrass restoration? And how do we support the workforce to do it? Because it's not just Bill and me going out on a boat, although that works on the small scale. It's, you know, if you're going to restore in a big way, you need people out there doing the work. So any initial thoughts? Let's talk about barriers first. And I'm going to take notes in our note file. There we go. And you are also welcome to add notes to the note section. But let's come up with some barriers in terms of what we do think are the barriers to restoration.
Well, Jamie, I'm thinking, you know, one that's kind of obvious right off the top is, you know, a repository of information that tells you where the appropriate sites are. You know, so whether that lives in GIS space which overlays, depth, whatever kind of water quality information. I'm not really sure what the status of that kind of information is, where it's located, how it could be centralized, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a lot of viewers, but there is an eelgrass habitat suitability index model. It's a terrible name.
Uh-huh.
But it's not available. People have it on their own computers, but it is not available in any of the layers that are out there, like the Blue Plan or the Aquaculture Mapper. You can't see that.
Jamie, I would also add something that we talked about last time was just the percent coverage of eelgrass. So the map layers that we have from various years, and some of them just have overall coverage, where some of them have a legend that shows a range of percent coverage from 0 to 100. So the inconsistency makes it difficult.
Yeah. So Jamie, those databases, the eelgrass suitability index, does that take into account historical coverage, or are those two separate repositories of information? Because it seems like it would be useful if that was part of the determination of where you're going to get the best return on your investment.
Yeah, I think it again comes to living on individuals' computers. So
Right.
I actually don't even have the suitability index model layer on my computer. I should, because I helped develop it, but I have the historical distribution layers. And
Yeah.
I think, again, bringing that all together, it's almost like we need an eelgrass restoration focused mapper, but I hate to add another mapper, especially when there are some really good ones out right now. But those might be layers to put into those maps. I think one of the other challenge that I get with the mappers is that for instance, the aquaculture mapper has so much more than aquaculture, and I use it in my classes to talk about water quality and other things. So driving people to that mapper is another question, and that perhaps falls under that outreach piece, is how do we inform people that go to this mapper and you can see this information?
Yeah, and maybe the form that takes can be guided by who we think the end users should be or
Yeah.
would be for this, might determine the level of accessibility and where it lives.
Yeah.
That makes sense too. Craig is going by who would be using the data, but also Long Island Sound Study, the office has put together a few online resources and story maps. So that's also another potential location, or they could just be linked together.
Right. Yeah.
But also the Habitat Suitability Index is going to be updated. So it's 10 years old now. It's going to be updated. So which would make it, since we have new tools and widgets and such, that's going to turn it out to be available, more publicly available.
So Kelly, the platform is 10 years old, or it's actually using 10-year-old data?
Both.
Oh, well, that seems pretty.
Is 10 years.
That seems pretty
So
important.
Yeah. So it's, and the data is a little bit older than that, but temperature was just updated, and then there's going to be a bigger update coming to it. I'm not sure what the status is as far as timing. Maybe the next year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah, I asked NUIPIC about it. NUIPIC is the funding host. They're hosting the money to fund that. And I think I was told that they're probably going to announce the RFP for it next spring, or maybe early, like late winter next spring. Yeah. So location, understanding what we have, and understanding what might be suitable. Are there other barriers?
Well, just making sure that the competing uses are well defined. So you may have, like, we're working with Indian River Shellfish right now, or on their lease site. They're not working directly with us, but they're giving us permission. They have a large site, but not all of it's suitable for oysters, not all of it's suitable for clams, not all of it's suitable for eelgrass. And so there needs to be more granularity. So if you have, let's say, aquaculture lease sites that are going to be, areas that are cleaned and they're in full production for dredging, that should just be a spatial layer that's not even considered, even though it may be ecologically suitable. But there's going to be, I would guess, there's going to be enough areas on the margins for us to get started in a meaningful way to get enough acreage to start meeting some of the goals, say, of the Long Island Sound study, that we can just avoid those out of the gate. And then I would also add to that, I don't know if this data exists. I probably should, it might be good to look back at the blue plan and see how it's described, but trawling areas. So areas where pocket trawlers are going in and getting fish, and like you said before, the mooring areas, and just having having very clearly defined, and maybe this does go through the blue plan, areas where we're going to have competition, and we just shouldn't, at this stage in the game, we just shouldn't even consider. And to remove a barrier, like you said, Jamie, when you have a lot of competing interests coming in and saying, are you going to prevent us from using this area, like the divers that you were talking about when you were setting up your restoration site? I think that'll help ease the way with moving forward with the public.
Yeah. So regarding things like, whether a lease is being trawled, or maybe they're doing deparation cages, or whatever it is that's happening in the lease, is that part of the permit that they have? Like, do we have a way of knowing that without going and talking to each of them individually? Do we have that information? Yeah.
The fixed gear is in the aquaculture mapping atlas, so there is a gear layer in there. There's not an easy way to tell if someone is dredging in the area, but that's something that Dave and his staff could answer, because some of those leases they're actively leased but not actively used. They may be used for cultivation or depuration. Some may lay fallow for a while. I actually had a follow-up question for Kelly, because I know that USDA just finished their subaqueous soils mapping effort. And so I wondered if that was taken into account in developing the habitat suitability layer for eelgrass, or if that just didn't coincide, wasn't finished in time.
It wasn't finished in time for the existing version, that 10-year-old version. One of the challenges with doing that model was we wanted data sets that were Long Island Sound wide. I think with this next model, my hope is that that maybe they will parse out and say, well, here we have this really kind of intense data set in the Eastern Sound, and because we've had a lot of benthic mapping going on in the last 10 years. So, but it's not sound wide. So perhaps the model can adjust and, use more rich data sources in certain areas of the Sound. But if I recall, because I did review the draft of the RFP for the new suitability index model, and if I recall, they specifically called out the soil survey. There's new LIDAR surveys for bathymetry. So the RFP itself did make reference to a lot of those new data sets and said, we want these in the model. So I believe that those will be included. So I had a question for the aquaculture folks, because I think this is a challenge that I've been thinking about, but I haven't heard anyone talk about it. So we talk about shellfish aquaculture leases that are laying fallow. They're leased but not active. To me, if I'm doing a restoration effort, I'm probably avoiding shellfish leases to the largest extent that I possibly can, because even if they're laying fallow, that person might want to, it's under a lease, that person might want to do something on that lease 5 years from now. Do we have a sense of, you know, we have leases, some which are leased, some which are not, and then out of the leased areas, some are actively used, some are not used. Bill gave the example of like areas of a lease not being suitable for oysters, and then this area not suitable for clams. Is that something that we could recommend goes into, like, do we have that information in a way that it could go into the suitability index or become a map layer that you could turn on and say, okay, that's a great spot for eelgrass, but there's going to be potential problems in the future. Yeah.
I was hoping Dave would answer, but I think that's going to be difficult to get at. Dave, do you want to answer that?
Oh, I got lost in the question a little bit. So,
So did I.
So you're specifically talking about leases, not about areas outside of leases that, yes? So I look at it as, you know, there's 75,000 acres of leased areas or natural beds in the Sound. And there's a significant amount of, there's much more acreage outside of that. So, you know, I guess I think it just would be administratively easier to work on areas outside of shellfish leases to start.
I think that's the question for me, though, because the eelgrass, when you look at the suitability index, the area where eelgrass is likely to be most successful in terms of planning are almost a direct overlap of the shellfish leases. So once you get deeper than about 9 meters or so, you really probably don't plant eelgrass in that area, because unless you're in the far eastern Sound and your water clarity is really good. And so it does tend to be in that kind of ribbon along the coast where aquaculture occurs. So that's part of the challenge. You know, while there's lots of area outside of the aquaculture leases, most of it is unsuitable for eelgrass. I don't have a good sense for, you know, when I look at the map in the aquaculture mapper, it looks like almost all of the shallow area of Long Island Sound is in a lease. Are they all likely to be leased? Are they all likely to be farmed at some point in the future? Like, what's the goal as we look ahead for those leased areas? Because I think that's where the challenge comes. Right now, we can find places to put eelgrass. The challenge comes, you know, 15, 20 years down the road when we're now looking for new places for eelgrass.
Yeah. I got a question. On land, whenever a developer comes in or something, there's a set aside or reserve a percentage for maintaining forest. Similarly, in a leased area, if you're going to get a lease, should you not then have a set aside for, you know, eelgrass restoration, et cetera, you know, to kind of have this crossover? So I don't think it's one or the other. Why isn't there, you know, a joint use of a leased property?
Yeah, Larry, that's kind of what I was talking about. Is if let's say you're a farmer and you have a swampy area that you can't grow a crop in, say corn, but it's got a lot of ecological value or potential, you know, why can't you get a conservation easement on and pay less taxes?
Right.
Thing. Or what the other chapter is, you know, looking at the carbon sequestration and maybe more active management, because one of the advantages of being a leaseholder is you have that bottom. So you have some site control over it. Not everything, obviously, people can drive boats over it and things like that, but you have some site control. And if you had an area that wasn't suitable for the product you're growing, the shellfish product, but you could make money on a carbon credit because it's suitable for eelgrass, then why not? You know, that's kind of maybe an end goal. With that, I hope that kind of getting at you want where we can have both. You know, but they're very site specific, and each farmer has a different plan. And how are we going to be able to incorporate that into the site suitability index, which I think if we could do that somehow, and David, I don't know how, what kind of information you have that would get us there, but that would really paint a clear picture for the practitioners to start going out and doing action. Or maybe we do it piecework. I don't know. I don't know the answer. Do each lease custom.
I will add that one of the benefits of this is that eelgrass actually likes to grow in those rockier areas, or can grow in those areas where you're not necessarily going to want to put gear down. That it's not all, eelgrass is not just looking for the soft sandy bottom.
What's really interesting is if you go at it from that angle, the other side of the equation is that the shellfish growers are now currently restricted, so they can't work in eelgrass or within close proximity to it. And so typically they have a gear area that's within their lease area, and they may have to move that gear area around if eelgrass encroaches upon their lease. So if we could tackle that other side of the equation to say that, they're not necessarily having a major impact on eelgrass, that, these two can occur, and that also you could have some sort of stipulation where there's an allowance for eelgrass restoration on a lease. And again, that could be area by area. I won't speak for what people desire, but that would be really interesting to make these things, compatible.
And to follow up on that, I mean, let's say you do have a successful restoration and it does start to encroach on a gear area, and if the restrictions are changed, those could be potential places for rhizomes. So if you want to have a resource you can dig them all up because it's in an active aquaculture area, but then those rhizomes become a commodity that can be sold to another restoration practitioner or moved somewhere else. So that it's not even a nuisance, it also becomes a product.
Yeah, so I think identifying, the regulatory barriers for doing some of these really great creative solutions should certainly be a recommendation or an outgrowth of this committee. I mean, I love these ideas. The question is what impediments exist to at least try it on, some pilot scales.
Yeah, we're doing a little one right now, and as far as other barriers, Dave Carey was excellent in moving permits forward for us, at least from the Bureau of Aquaculture. Since it was and I just wanted to thank you on that, Dave, because I mean they helped us write it up and move it through, and we have to rely on some other permits that we had previously for some of the equipment, through the Unified Water Study and our cameras that DEEP had already issued some general permits on. But as far as being able to put down seeds within a lease, we had permission to work on 2 leases, or in the state waters. It was pretty easy. I have to say, it really wasn't a barrier. The Bureau of Aquaculture wasn't a barrier in my experience this last go around.
Yeah, but what about from the grower side, Tessa? Do you think that, because the way there's like this separation of church and state between eelgrass and aquaculture, that it's going to make the growers really twitchy, to think about trying to get some eelgrass activities on their lease if, the end result by the letter of the reg is it's going to curtail their more valuable, use of that space.
I agree. And I think that's why Jamie did a good by accelerating the collaborative's work on with the NER outreach work on policy and neighboring state regulation. I think that should be the primary thing this working group gets in front of the legislature, because the collaborative has a lot of expertise on all the barriers to the ecology of restoring eelgrass, and they're gonna be out a year working on that. So maybe we can address that, as Jamie's saying, but I think that is the first thing we need to do is figure out how to alleviate that tension. That's my personal opinion.
So I have an idea, but I have no idea if it's possible from eelgrass or regulatory perspectives. And I think this is part of where I want to know what the policy is. You know, where is what is the where is the rule written that that aquaculture cannot happen in eelgrass? Because I'd like to maybe change that. And the condition would be, you know, if you restore eelgrass, if you have a lease and you're working your lease and eelgrass moves into your lease, in my perhaps naive wish here, I would like to be able to say, okay, you don't have to move your gear. If eelgrass is coming in and your gear is there and you're working the area, obviously the area is suitable for eelgrass, and that eelgrass can deal with the stress of the aquaculture gear. Now, I'm not suggesting that we go out and put aquaculture gear into existing beds. This would be a specific case where if you have a lease that you are working, it's active, and eelgrass moves into it, that prohibition against working in eelgrass is lifted or relaxed in some way. But again, that might be a very naive hope. What do you guys think about that?
That involves changing the Army Corps' general permit, and it's a 5-year permit. So we can provide you with contacts for that in the document.
I don't think that 5-year is out of the realm of possibility. You know, I think eelgrass restoration is a long-term effort. And if we were able to get that permit changed, even if it were 5 years down the road, there's still plenty of restoration to go on in the next 5 years. In fact, I don't even think we'll be restoring on a big scale within 5 years. So how likely do you think we are to be able to change that approach?
Boy, go ahead, Tessa.
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, Army Corps can use its own discretion to vary from that policy, but it's intertwined with Connecticut Deep and Department of Agriculture as well. So that's where it came from, and it sort of became, in a way, codified in the Army Corps general permit. So there have been a couple instances, which I don't know if, David, you want to talk about those specifically in the Ram Island area and changes that have been made to allow them to work there?
No, but so I was trying to find it. I believe it's in statute on the eelgrass or regulation, but I'm searching and I can't find it. But then Tessa is right. As a result that it was so because it was a DEP policy, Army Corps wrote that into their permit. So now it's both a DEP and an Army Corps. And yes, so there is some regulatory discretion. And so that's Army Corps at this point, only down in Groton and Stonington is exercising regulatory discretion because it appears the cage aquaculture and eelgrass down there are compatible and, you know, benefiting each other. So they are, you know, not taking action where the 25 feet is no longer exists. But so I think, and so I was trying to search the statute. So I think it has to be changed at the state level first, and then the next time the Corps rewrites the permit, it would then change that language.
A question, David, Tessa. So does the Army Corps do that, the general permit, that's nationwide, correct? So anywhere there's eelgrass from Florida, or is it just a Connecticut?
No,
New England.
New England, okay.
there's
Yeah, 'cause
a
I'm pretty
Connecticut
sure,
general permit that I put in, that I put in the chat.
I think there is, copy that. There is, on the West Coast, they do have eelgrass and aquaculture occurring together, co-occurring.
So on the West Coast, they are covered by the nationwide permit under Army Corps. In New England, it's different. We have general permits by state that are covered under the New England district. So it's sort of apples and oranges.
Yep.
So Tessa and Dave, is it is it your feeling that, I want to make sure I understand this right. It was your feeling that it's in the Army Corps statute because it was in the DEP statute at the time, so that if Connecticut Deep changes that position, that the Army Corps is likely to adopt that for their general permitting?
That is the way I understand it.
Okay. That's good to know.
And then, so we would, so, to change the statute, we'd have to submit a bill to the legislature and go through the process. This is not rulemaking. This is not through the rulemaking. This would be through the legislature. Or could this be done just through rulemaking?
That would depend if there's a specific statute that states it, then there's likely a rule that, comes after it. So you'd have to do both. So I haven't found it, unfortunately.
So yes, maybe.
I don't know that I've ever seen it in the statutes, to be honest, but when Army Corps reviews its general permit every 5 years, it has to go out to public comment. And so that was 2021, so we're a few years out, but it'll come out a year in advance typically.
So is it the sense then that we should do this at the state level, and this is not something that we need to involve the Connecticut federal delegation?
I think that's correct. I think this is a state issue, not a federal one. But that's just my feeling. I can ask Emily Watling as she's looking through the regulations. I'm hoping that over the next 2 weeks, as she pulls them together, we'll have a sense of, where was it written? Is it, is it a law? Is it a rule? Is it a policy? What are we looking at? Yeah.
Because if I think we do that, I think it's going to create a much different atmosphere for us to work in right away.
I agree.
All right. So beyond that issue, do we have other barriers to restoration? One that I always think of is, how are we going to do it? Like, both funding and people and storage. So when you are restoring eelgrass, there are 2 ways to do it, 2 general ways. You can either do a seed-based restoration. So you're harvesting seeds, and then you usually harvest them in late spring, early summer. You store them in a refrigerator, and you usually plant them in the fall. That's not, there's modifications of that, but generally that's how it goes. In order to get those seeds, you usually need big tanks of flowing seawater, because you often collect you're not out there like picking seeds off of the shoot. You actually collect a whole shoot, and it has 30 to 50 seeds on it. You bring it to a tank, you let those seeds ripen, and you collect them as they're dropped off of the shoots. So there's running seawater tanks that are needed to do that. And there's all sorts of different devices people have made, like centrifuges and cones and different things to collect seeds. And then into the refrigerator and out for planting. The other way that that eelgrass is restored is you go out into beds and collect adult shoots. You usually collect an adult plant, 1 per square meter, so that you're not like, clearing a bed. And then those adult plants, again, are stored in running seawater, but usually you want to get them back out into the environment within a week. So that's a shorter term storage. You're collecting the adult plants, and you're just holding them until you can get them ready for planting, usually within a week or 2. I have had conversations with the folks over at Cornell Cooperative Extension. They do a lot of the restoration. Well, no, all of the restoration in Long Island Sound is done by their team. They have a team of divers. They've been doing it for decades. And when we started talking about eelgrass restoration, kind of in this group that meets along the Atlantic coast, Chesapeake Bay is like, yeah, we harvest, millions of seeds a year, and we're putting millions of seeds out, and we harvest like 50,000. So we're at a much smaller scale. And the question that some of the people posed to Cornell was, could you ramp up your tanks? Could you ramp up your greenhouses, your flow through systems to store the seeds? Yes, they can do that. To store the adult plants, yes. They can't grow adult plants from seeds. They said they would need to vastly increase the size of their facility to do that. So that's one of the challenges is how do we physically do this? I don't know if this, I don't think that this is supportable at a research level. For instance, I don't see Craig or I going into the eelgrass seed growing business. So what are the alternatives for, ramping this up? I mean, really, ideally, it would become a business, and someone is procuring seeds and providing seeds and doing the restoration effort. I think that there's a chance to turn that into an industry type of job. But other thoughts on that, or any ideas of how we deal with, how do we accomplish this? So yeah, let's say we get the money. Now, how do we do it? Yeah.
So, one of the barriers to that is you need to have some entity that can do that, at scale and afford to pay for that. So you need to know there's going to be funding out into the future on a steady scale so you can make a business plan. The other thing backing up is that the EPA was starting their flowering study this year. So, looking at the range maps, and to Tessa's point about density, when you have a green blob on a GIS map, that's one thing, but you need to know how many seeds you can get from that area without taking too many, what efficiency. So I think we're far away from going through all the available eelgrass beds that we could be harvesting seeds from to get up the scale, and understanding the density and the timing of when to get those seeds. And it all kind of comes at once. I mean, there's some gradation between areas, and having that workforce ready when those seeds are ready. It's kind of like agriculture. When the coffee's ready, whole villages will go to the coffee areas. Do we have that resource in underwater eelgrass?
Is anyone else having a hard time hearing Bill?
So yeah,
Bill, you're breaking up pretty bad.
There's
Yeah.
a lot of divers in Long Island Sound. But let me move I'm on a hotspot. So the other thing is, I think that we need to have some kind of systematic control over how all these seeds are gathered as well, when and where and what quantities. So I don't know who. Another question would be, who would oversee that effort?
That's a good question. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, this group can identify, right? I mean, if you want to get anything done, it just comes down to physical infrastructure and people, right? So, this group can identify existing capacity, for collecting, holding, and just, throwing some thoughts out there. Who's got flow through seawater? Right? I mean, the Yukon lab does. I don't think we have excess capacity. Mystic Aquarium, maybe. Norwalk Aquarium, maybe. I don't know. I think that's what we need to think about. And then if the result of that analysis is that, there's such a scarcity of that resource, that's a recommendation.
Yeah.
Right? Same thing when you flip the coin and you look at personnel, identify the scarcity of that resource and then make recommendations as to how you might be able to fill it. I mean, Bill's point, about, volunteer divers is an excellent one. I mean, I talk to him pretty frequently and talk to him about restoration efforts, and the first thing they say is, how can we get involved? But all that needs to be coordinated.
One concept that was brought up by the guy Rob we're working with, Rob Basilith, is you have, just like a fisherman goes out and catches fish, or a lobsterman, you bring a quantity to a place to sell. So if there's let's say we figure out a quota of seeds per eelgrass bed, and divers could go out and collect those, and then there would be some wholesaler that would buy them. And then they're then made available to the restoration community, as they could go and buy a bag of seeds as part of one of their grant line items. And that's the dream. Again, I don't think we're quite there with what our quantities are and what our locations are yet.
Yeah, I think you hit on something that is a concern, is what is the harvest capacity of our beds?
Mhm.
When seeds were being harvested off of Fisher's Island, the Fisher's Island community were very concerned that their beds were being, de-seeded, that too much was being taken. And I think there is that question of what is a reasonable harvest, and then how do you control that? Because if we were successful in building a restoration business where people could go out and harvest seeds, and you have wholesalers, you now have put the pressure on over harvesting those seed beds, and now we've completely gone in the opposite direction, where we're stripping our beds instead of
And then it's
populating them.
Right. It's an enforcement burden
Yeah.
now as well. So yeah, I mean, it's the double-edged sword of the market incentive.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, guys, if you can lease a bed to grow shellfish, couldn't you lease a bed to harvest seeds?
Oh, that's good.
Control it that way, right?
Yeah.
So
That and no, go ahead, Larry.
No, I'm just kind of thinking it through.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
it's aquaculture, right? I mean, it's a business that you're trying to create, and so I think that's a great idea to kind of change it to the business model that can incent people and then manage it, because if they reduce their bed of seeds, they don't make any money in the future. So there's almost a self-incentive to be, I guess,
To nurture your bed. Yeah.
yeah. And obviously you can go measure it once in a while to make sure they're not screwing up or they lose their lease. So yeah, rather than random folks going down there, I think a controlled environment might actually work out. And you got a model, right?
Yeah.
You got,
That's a great idea, Larry.
all right, that's it for
I
me.
like
for
that.
today.
And even if I were leasing an eelgrass bed for seed harvest, I don't necessarily have to do the collection. I could allow volunteer divers to come in, harvest my bed. I take a percentage of their sale to the wholesaler, but I also, as the lease owner, have control over that bed. And I'm saying, I want to have this bed. So I could see it working like it doesn't have to be an individual going out and harvesting those seeds. They could bring in those divers that might want to go out and get some work. Yeah. Catch limits on seeds or take limits on seeds. Yeah. Yeah, I could see that working. That's awesome. So, other thoughts on barriers that we may not have touched on yet? We've got about, 15 minutes left here to get some ideas down, if there are any there.
Yeah, Jimmy, my only thought was, and this might not really be part of our charge, but it, some metric of efficacy, right? I mean, if you're making this huge investment on the front end to ramp up restoration, shouldn't there be some measurement of how successful you are? I mean, I'm not, like I said, I'm not necessarily sure that that's within the charge of this, of what we're trying to do, but it's just sort of the logical extension of spending a lot of effort to do something that may or may not work.
Yeah, I think I kind of view it as it is within our realm here.
Okay.
If we're recommending, you know, the expenditure of money on restoration, you want to make sure that you're getting what you expect.
Yeah.
In a lot of restoration work, the metric is how much did you put in? How much did you restore? How many river
Right.
miles did you open up? How many marsh plants did you put in? What's your acreage of eelgrass restored? But I think a challenge is that, you know, I could go out and I could restore 50 acres of eelgrass and I chose a bad location and it's gone. Does that mean I shouldn't get to restore more eelgrass later? No, I should get to, but maybe not there. You know, the
This is hitting a little close to home, Jamie.
I know. Eelgrass can eelgrass is variable, and you know it has a relatively low success rate when you compare it with, you know, your garden, right? So there is some expectation that it won't survive, but that's why we do pilot planting, why we don't go out and just do 50 acres at once. We go out and do some test plots and see if the eelgrass survives in our little test plots, and then come in and do a full-scale restoration. So I think that's there. In terms of, you know, the kind of standard protocol of don't just jump in the water and plant 50 acres of eelgrass where you think it should be. But that is perhaps a recommendation, is that there need to be some recommendations for what's the best management, you know, what's the best practice for how we restore eelgrass in Long Island Sound. I think Cornell Cooperative has that. I don't know that they've written it down for everybody else, but they certainly have that in their playbook. But I'm always on board for longer term follow-up to see if it would, not just how much you put in, but how much survived. Yeah.
Yeah, Jamie, you've mentioned, you know, Cornell Cooperative Extension a few times, and they are very, very good at what they do. And they are, you know, the source of expertise on this. But I also think that, you know, because this effort has originated here from the state of Connecticut, we should use the expertise that Cornell has, but I think we should focus on trying to develop, you know, in-state capacity for this, as opposed to, you know, asking them necessarily to expand their facility or take on an additional role. I think, especially if we're headed towards a model which is a little bit more market driven.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah.
I do too. And this is going to take a lot of years to learn how to do this properly and to scale it up. So if it's even possible, you know, we might be up against a climate wall that we can't defeat, but, you know, we're not just going to give up at this point in the game because we still have eelgrass. But you know, the longevity as far as a best management practice, what I've heard, maybe this isn't written down. If you got eelgrass that's living for 3 years after you plant it, then you can start feeling a little confident. And I would go beyond that and say, once it starts expanding on its own and it's producing its own speed and own seed and it's starting to move around, that's when you can kind of determine success. But that means staying on top of it for at least 3 years, but probably longer.
Yeah, I think that's critical, especially if you're trying to make a carbon credit argument.
Yeah. So the Chesapeake Bay has a policy where they literally put millions of seeds into Chesapeake Bay every year. And their idea is like reseeding a lawn that doesn't want to grow. You know, you keep throwing seed onto it, and yeah, some of it survives, some of it dies, but you just keep reseeding and eventually, hopefully, your lawn grows. So that's the approach in Chesapeake Bay. And Kayla Sullivan at Long Island Sound Study, who kind of leads their eelgrass work for the Long Island Sound Study, has this vision of requesting $1 million a year from Long Island Sound Study that goes into a restoration fund to support these efforts. So she would like $1 million set aside for eelgrass restoration every year, not restoration in general, eelgrass restoration. But then it starts to support this idea that you get a bed, but it's not just did that bed, you plant it and then you don't touch it again for 3 years and it survives. You know, these beds you plant them and then you I'm forgetting the term that the eelgrass people use, reinforce. You reinforce your bed by coming back and planting more plants or adding seeds. So you reinforce that planting over time until it's self-sustaining. That's the goal, is you get a bed that can survive all on its own. So I think there's a lot of movement towards this, but yes, developing the capacity in Connecticut to do that restoration would be ideal, because right now we do rely a lot on Cornell. I think many of us have worked with Cornell to do in the water activities, and having someone with that capacity here in Connecticut would be great. The question becomes, what does that look like? I think one option is that market-driven piece. But even if we, go with like the eelgrass lease kind of idea and making it more market-driven, we've already mentioned we need a coordinator to coordinate some of these activities anyways. We need a place, we need a host for that coordinator, for someone like Cornell Cooperative Extension, that is the extension agency of Cornell. Maybe it's UConn's extension or some similar type of agency that takes on that. I don't want to say coordination role. It's like the central kernel of activity that allows other activity to occur. Yeah. But where do we host that? If we could say who should host it, and everybody we said would agree, where are some ideal places for hosting? Yeah.
I think it needs to be out east because of the water quality issues for the flow through. Can UConn expand where its flow through tanks are and have dedicated space? It's a public university. It seems logical to me.
Yeah, we've been talking about an expansion of the flow through facility. It's due for an upgrade anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So Bill, that was my first thought. And the space for expansion does exist there. But you'd certainly have to, get UConn to agree that it's sort of earmarked. The way it works now is, it's project by project priority. But I think that this needs to be earmarked as this is the function of this part of the expansion, and it will always be that.
Yeah.
And it's a land grant university based on agricultural roots, right? So it kind of fits. Or it could be private. I don't know, Tessa, would you know any of the shellfish growers that would consider doing something like that, flow through tanks?
Well, there are 2 hatcheries right now. There's one in Stonington that's not currently operational. I mean, if they had funding to do that, possibly. I don't think they have any other incentive right now, just because most of the operations are really small. So deviating from their normal day-to-day would be difficult without compensation. There's also Fisher's Island, but they're very small scale. Norm Bloom has a very large hatchery. I mean, that's not exactly where eelgrass is growing in the Sound right now, but maybe more capacity there.
So an interesting thing that came up from, I've just forgotten his name, Steve Heck, who works at SUNY Stony Brook in Brad Peterson's lab. he mentioned that they have self-contained tanks, and they like their self-contained versus their flow-through tanks because they're a lot easier to maintain in terms of keeping out epiphytes and other things that grow on the eelgrass. So I think, you know, a place like Norm Bloom's, even though it is further west, if you're looking for like that self-contained, the recirculating tank, that's a possibility. I also think that, I mean, I haven't been to other eelgrass grow out facilities, but it is not as big as you might expect. Like, it does not take as much room as you might think to gather seeds off of plants. Yeah. I think
That
we
sounds
were,
cool.
what was that? Oh, the
Right.
sound school. Yeah.
I mean, there again, I don't know that you want to rely on students for a year-round project that, you know, but they have a great
So-
facility.
The interesting thing is with the seeds, again, it's in the spring semester and then you plant them in the fall. Well, actually the real activity of the harvest, I guess it takes place in June, through June. So
And
yeah,
July
which is still
too.
the school year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's good community engagement. It's STEM driven. So yeah, I mean, Tessa, your point is well taken about trusting things that are really important to students, but
Yeah.
Students can be
There's-
amazing. It's just they're not there all summer long. So
yeah, no, it's
not
right.
putting down any students, but
No, I mean, it's
They
a
actually
matter
do-
of focus. Yeah.
yeah, they do have some summer programs, but I don't know that they're continuous throughout the summer, but it's something to explore. And
Yeah.
also, we're working on an aquaculture workforce development project with the Sound School and Southern Connecticut State University, among many other partners, but Southern may have some capacity, or they may have graduate or undergraduate students that they're already working in the school. I wonder if that's an opportunity for them to work on something
Yeah.
that's grass related. They're really looking to expand blue economy projects. So
Yeah, I think for the private sector, you know, you'd have to make the case that they're going to get some kind of return on this. And I think that at this point, it's pretty opaque, you know, what the value of this product is going to be, whether they could even cover costs. So again, I do like the market driven model. I'm just thinking about whether or not the incentives are going to be there for, you know, people to jump on board with it. But I think that's part of what we do here is, you know, we kind of make some evaluation as to what would it take to ...
Well, yeah, I think if we look at the potential areas that we just all talked about, list those out in the plan, and you know, we're gonna have, I'm assuming a bill to change the statute that, thank you for finding that, David. To not have it, you know, don't get handcuffed if you drop an oyster on a bed of eelgrass. So we get that would be one bill, but another component of it could be a financial note to the legislature to provide startup money for expanding the flow through seed or contained some kind of seed facility for the state of Connecticut, and just do a direct ask. So that's not a capital expense by a private business, whether it goes to the public university or a charter school or a private business. However, have the state, you know, kick that first step out the door as a recommendation from this group, potentially, if we think we're ready for that by February 1st.
All right, 2 minutes left. Any parting thoughts?
This is a great conversation, by the way.
Yeah.
That's my parting thought. Very
Very
good.
good. I have a little bit of homework for you guys, and I'm going to ask if Lucas sends us out all an email about this. If you guys can look through the outline, and if there are sections that you are like, hey, I've already got that section written in, you know, this other thing I did, it would be helpful to go ahead and put it in there. So if you have chunks of text that you think fit into that outline, please add them. And Craig, you had said that you could pretty easily write a section on eelgrass habitat restoration.
Wait, did I say that?
You did. It's even written down.
Is it written down? Well, then,
Yeah. And
can't
then
deny it.
the other thing that we're talking about next time is stressors to Connecticut eelgrass, which I can take unless somebody wants to step forward and take a section of it. But those are our two kind of, let's discuss these briefly. Remember, that's the 5 to 10 minute presentation with 5 to 10 minutes of discussion of it. So I don't expect these to be especially controversial, but it's really just, did we cover everything that we feel is important to share in this report? And did we miss anything? Craig, no writing necessary for that right now. Just kind of think about it, and then we can jot down ideas in that section as we go in our meeting next time. And if you look at the document, I think there's already like 7 ideas listed in there. 7 topic ideas listed in there.
Okay.
So I'm going to give that to you to lead.
Okay, so I'm on the
And-
spot for the next meeting?
You are.
Yeah, super.
And if anyone wants to talk about stressors to Connecticut eelgrass, I'm happy to turn over the mic to somebody else. But otherwise, I can definitely do that. All right. So the homework, Lucas, if you could send out an email to everyone to just look through that outline, and if they have existing text, thoughts, or ideas, to start putting them in there. It doesn't even have to be grammatically correct, but if there are ideas that people want to get in, please go ahead and feel free to edit that document.
And
All
then
right.
just checking on that document, Dr. Vaudry, everyone has access to edit it. I know I'm able to see it now, but I wasn't sure if they're able to edit it by the link.
I think I changed it, so hopefully you
Okay.
should be able to edit it now. If you can't, it means I didn't change it correctly, so let me know.
Okay. All right. I will let you know if anyone says that.
Yeah, Lucas,
Okay.
can you send out an email that's got that link to the document in it, just so I've got it at sort of at the top of
Yeah,
my,
so I'll put
email.
our working group document in it, and then
Okay.
I'll also send the one of the outline too for everyone to start kind of.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you all.
See you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye all. Thank you.
Thank you, bye.